All right, we'd like to welcome everyone back to the first episode of 2019 of the Eurosnob podcast. My name is Alex John, and back with my familiar buddy, my familiar colleague here, Ian Smith. How you doing, man?
Oh, not too bad, bud. Just living on very limited sleep these days. So I'm just doing what I can.
Yeah, daddy duty calls, and hope you had a good holiday period. How did everything go for you?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. Good to spend some time with family. They're dying to be around the little guy more than they are me. So
That's right. You become like yesterday's news, right? Like, who cares about you?
pretty much, man. It's like, hey, when you win, when you coming back around, we want to see Sawyer sometime soon. It's not we want to see you. It's we want to see your kid. So
I know the feeling. We've got one of our close friends just had a baby as well, so I'm like, let's go over to their house. We don't really need to see them. So, and actually, over the Christmas period, I was in Iceland, so I didn't get to watch too many of the Arsenal games over the Christmas period, but I tried to keep track as best as I could. And also, I now know what you go through during winter because it was fucking freezing.
yeah, it hasn't even been that bad for us lately. We've been lucky. We had a cold and snowy November, but since then it's been 30s and 40s, and today is the first day since like the middle of December that was below freezing for the entire day. It's crazy.
And that's considered good for you
Oh yeah,
compared to the normal.
it's been in like the upper 30s, and that's been great. But now we are like 25 degrees all day today, and it's going to stay there for the next week. And by this time, a couple weeks from now, probably going to be really, really cold, like single digits, 15, something like that. So,
Yeah. Meanwhile, in Florida, I think a couple days ago, at one point it was 45 in the morning, and so that was the cause of a lot of concern, and it was an issue of national security probably. But
it's a tough life down there, man.
I
Tough life.
know that's right. But no, Iceland definitely gave me a new appreciation for that. Although it's a great country, cheap plug, but everyone should check it out once in their life. It's a bucket list trip. But kind of getting into some Arsenal discussion to start off. We're not really going to get into the results so much on this episode. We're going to kind of get into some of the big picture items, and I think the biggest item today that has come up has kind of been the financial status of the club. And it all came about from a press conference that Unai Emery was giving today, where he basically said the club can't afford to buy new players. The only deals we can do in January are loans. And I think for people who don't really follow the club from a business perspective, they were probably thinking, what the hell, right? One of the richest clubs in the world, and all we can do is a loan. So I just want to kind of give a little bit of quick backstory, and then we can kind of get into, how we got into this situation and how do we get out of it. So basically there was a study conducted by a finance expert that basically showed that Arsenal was one of the clubs that had no money from owner financing put into the club. So basically completely self-sustaining, which we all pretty much knew. The problem sort of comes into the fact that, when you don't make Champions League, the revenue takes a significant hit. And for us, our revenue fell about 40 million euros. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we weren't in the Champions League. And in the meantime, our wage bill increased because you had new deals for Mesut Ozil, Henrik Mkhitaryan on big wages, Lacazette, Aubameyang. So, all of those costs increased. And so, we also failed at selling players for any sort of profit, with the Aaron Ramsey situation, which we'll get into, Danny Welbeck, things like that. So our wage bill is incredibly high. And there's also Premier League financial fair play rules, which basically mean that you can only increase your wage bill a certain amount every year in order to stay in compliance. Otherwise, there's some type of penalty. So you can compensate for that by increasing your commercial revenue. But because of the lack of Champions League and the recent struggles, our negotiating power for a lot of our commercial deals has gone down a little bit. So we haven't been able to negotiate some of the better commercial deals. And so we really have kind of been on a shoestring budget. Now, people are saying that in the summer it's going to be better because we have the new Adidas deal and a new Emirates deal, and then a couple of the high earners are coming off the wage bill. But at least for the time being, we're in a position where we can't really improve the squad to the extent that I think we all want. And so I just kind of want to get your initial take on what your reaction was when you saw this. Were you kind of surprised at just the level of financial instability there is right now? And how much do you think that's kind of affected the fan mood and the product we see on the field?
Well, I mean, I think we all kind of knew that that was a situation at the club. I mean, the club's been telling us this for a long time. Not quite as specific as this report that came out today was, but they've always come out and said that.
Sorry, cell phone in the background.
That's all right. I mean, the club has always kind of talked about being a self-sustaining model, and we've known our commercial deals aren't great. We've known our wage bill, our wage structure was all out of whack with, lower end players earning really high wages, and then we started adding higher wages of Mkhitaryan and Ozil and Aubameyang, like you said. So once you start doing that, that wage bill is already so high. We all know when you look at our commercial deals, it's all pretty public knowledge that we've been lacking pretty significantly compared to some of our other Premier League rivals. We haven't done well in that area as of late, and that's all stuff that I think we knew. And if we didn't want to accept it, I mean, that's kind of the one thing. Like, if you didn't want to believe it, that's just because you didn't want to accept it. We've known that this is a situation the club's in. The frustrating thing, really, and there's not much use in crying over spilled milk, or however that old time saying goes. But they always said back when we were trying to pay off the new stadium, that once we were done with that, it would be a different story, and we would be able to compete with the biggest clubs in the world. And I think that's the fact that they just completely blatantly lied about that is easily the most frustrating thing about it for me. I mean, that was how long ago, and nothing has changed. We're still on a shoestring budget. I mean, sure, we were able to buy players like Aubameyang, but the fact that when you look at our spending over the last year, we're getting outspent by half the Premier League. I don't have it in front of me, but it's actually kind of embarrassing right now. I don't know how it compares to. I'm sorry, you said what you said about how. About the owner contribution, where do we come in as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, so we're looking at all the Premier League clubs. We're one of only 2 clubs that's not had a single penny of owner financing over the past decade. So it's us and Middlesbrough. So the owners of the top Premier League teams since 2008, Manchester City's owner has put in 1.275 billion euros. Chelsea's had put in 520 million euros, Manchester United 318 million euros, Liverpool 257 million euros, Leicester 208 million euros, and Sunderland 189 million euros. And that's just money that the owners have put in. That's not counting, just normal revenue. So that's the additional money being put in by the owners, and we've put in 0.
Yeah, and that's insane, because our owner, I mean, if you look at it, it talks about over the past decade. I mean, that was not 100% on Kroenke over the past decade, because he certainly wasn't the only person. But now he is now him being the sole owner of our club, it's going to fall squarely on his shoulders. I guess my only hope, it's something that our buddy Bill brought up to me on Twitter not too long ago, was that I think it was Bill, once he's done paying for his new stadium, or once his new stadium for the LA Rams is up and running, he's going to have, more exposable income, or expendable income that might come back into Arsenal. And I sure hope that's true. I mean, I know he's spending $2 billion of his own money on that stadium, or something along those lines. It's an astronomical amount of money. So I can understand from that standpoint. And if it hadn't been this long without our ownership putting money into the club, I would want to say, be patient, give it another year, see what happens once he's got that part of his business settled. Maybe he'll start contributing to this team, but I don't have any faith that it's going to happen. I'm pretty sure that this is just the norm that we need to get used to. And I'm not ready to accept that yet, but I'm certainly afraid that our time of being considered one of the top clubs consistently, it's gonna start to come to an end. I know that sounds drastic, but I can certainly, that's my fear.
I honestly don't think it's drastic. I think that's a very fair assessment, because I think you got to look at it several different ways. Obviously, the lack of owner financing is bad, and it shows what we're up against when I just, those numbers I cited from City, Liverpool, Chelsea, Leicester, Sunderland. I mean, that's crazy to think that Sunderland's had that much owner financing put into their club. But at the same time, with the financial fair play rules, even if Kroenke, hypothetically, even if he wanted to put in more money right now to buy more players on high wages, we couldn't do it, because we would still violate the financial play rules. Financial fair play, that's such a tongue twister. But the other issue is just the governing of the club and how the club's been run from an organizational standpoint has put the club in a hole. I mean, we both talked about the high wage structure. The wage structure has been pretty much shattered within the past 4 to 5 years, basically giving players wages that are absolutely crazy, while not being able to sell players. So the club's inability to sell players at their highest value has come back to bite us so significantly. And then you couple that with the commercial deals. I mean, there's one overriding factor in all of those things, and it's Ivan Gazidis. While he was here, most of these commercial deals were negotiated by Ivan Gazidis. Most of the wages were approved by Ivan Gazidis. And then you also do have to put a little bit of blame on Arsene Wenger. I mean, again, I know it's tough to put blame on someone who's no longer here, but at the same time, Arsene Wenger did want to bring in a lot of these players, and then also the refusal to sell players when we needed to. And I would point to a couple summers ago when we had the offer to sell Alexis Sanchez to Manchester City, and we would gotten 60 million for him or something like that in the summer. I think it was the summer of 2017, and we didn't. We held on to him, and then we tried on deadline day to sell him only if we could buy Thomas Lemar for 90 million, who we could have gotten earlier in the summer for 50 million. And then we end up getting nothing for Alexis except for Henrik Mkhitaryan's big wages. So that's 60 million you lost out on, and another hit to the wage bill. And it's just, and now, we have the Ramsey situation, which again, we'll get into. There's just so many overriding factors. So what I would say is, given the distance from Gazidis' departure, from the club, like given the time that's lapsed, my impression of him or my understanding of his success or failure at the club has really changed since then, because we're seeing just how deep a hole we're in now.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree. I think we're definitely in a worse position than the majority. I mean, at least I realized that we were. And when you really think about it, I don't know that it's so much that we were unable to get, to get transfer fees for for somebody like Alexis. I think part of the issue is that the middle tier to lower tier of player at our club, whether you want to, I don't know who you want to throw in there, but that middle tier of player. But the problem is that they're on such a high wage that you can't get a high transfer fee for it. I mean, who was it? Solanke just went for 19 million.
That's crazy, right?
But the difference is, if you take, I don't know it offhand, but I would almost guarantee that if you went and took a look at his wages, he's on almost nothing. He's on pennies compared to what some of our guys are on. So if you're trying to buy a player, a club that can't afford a high wage bill, they can make that payment in installments over a few years for a player like that. You can demand a higher transfer fee for a player who's not on high wages. But because we have so many guys on inflated wages that just aren't contributing to our team and really won't contribute to other teams, it's hard for us to get transfer fees in. So that's I think where you can put blame on Arsene Wenger for that, because that was his wage structure. He wanted his wage structure to be relatively even without too many people standing out. He didn't want to pay a lot for the stars and not a lot for everybody else. I mean, we're essentially operating under a salary cap. If you want to look at it that way, look around professional sports. look to the States, because that's where salary caps are the norm. What is the pay structure for leagues like that? They pay their superstars big time money, and they pay everybody else pennies. The middle class of wages just gets squeezed out. And Arsenal went about that completely the wrong way. And that's really where, our wage bill is killing us, and until we're able to, to purge a lot of that middle tier of player out of the club. And I think we're kind of starting to get there, but there's still a ways to go. We're not going to start writing that wage bill. I mean, we're going to need to get Mkhitaryan off the books. You're going to need to honestly probably get Mesut Ozil off the books. Danny Welbeck's got to come off. Trying to think of some other guys here, but Aaron Ramsey coming off the books is going to make a difference. Somebody like Petr Cech is on a huge wage, I'm sure. That's Monreal. I mean, as much as we like him, he's not the player he used to be, but his wages are probably way higher than they should be. These are, and again, I'm doing this just not knowing, without the numbers in front of me or reading off a list right now, but I would guarantee you that if you went and looked at what these players are on, it's way more than they should, and that's really what bogs down this wage bill.
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the wages. I mean, Carl Jenkinson is on $45,000 a week.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
That's crazy. We're talking $45,000 a week for your third string right back, all things considered.
I wouldn't even say that. He's probably lower down the pecking order than that.
Honestly, you're probably right, because Bellerin, Lichtsteiner, Maitland-Niles, and then Jenkinson. Yeah, you're probably right. So you're so spot on about the wage structure and this idea that everyone should be earning roughly around the same wages, and that's made it hard for Arsenal to move players for the longest time. And it doesn't seem like we learned from that. If anything, we kind of exacerbated those problems. I mean, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the, selling players and things like that, because, we let players get to the final year of their deal where you lose all your bargaining power. So either you sell them for a reduced fee or you hold on to them and try to get something out of them on the field, and then, lose them for free. So we've seen, that's what happened with Alexis and Mesut Ozil. Obviously, those situations ended differently. With Alexis, we realized, look, he's obviously not going to re-sign for us. And we realized that too late. We should have realized it earlier, but we took what we could get. I would have rather taken cash, and I think pretty much any Arsenal fan would agree with that. But then you end up in the position where you couldn't afford to lose both Alexis and Mesut. So you put Mesut Ozil on $350,000 a week. Now, how much difference was $350,000 a week off our wage bill make right now if we could have gotten any sort of fee for him? And we're not even sure how he fits into the system now. And so, that's a different discussion. But Aaron Ramsey, same thing. And this is kind of why when people say, oh, well, a couple of years without the Champions League is really no big deal. It really is a big deal, because the more time you're away from the Champions League, the harder it's going to be to get back in, because that means your revenue is taking a hit every year, which means that you have to cut corners elsewhere, either on wages or something to meet your financial fair play regulations. That means you can't spend big in the summer to get those types of players, or at least offer them the wages that would be enticing. And that means your quality of players is going to reduce. And you're probably going to sign more Dennis Suarez's, which we can get into later. So it all kind of goes hand in hand in terms of the club's negotiating power, the selling of players' wages, commercial deals. I mean, it all kind of comes together. And you brought up a great point when you said we were told that we were going to compete with the biggest clubs in Europe. Didn't Ivan Gonzalez once say, we're going to be at the level of Bayern Munich in a few years? It's something to that effect, right? Am I mistaken on that?
No, I don't know if it was specifically Bayern, but it was definitely said very, very clearly that we would be able to compete financially with every single club on the planet.
And now here we are with your manager saying that in public. And people were saying something to the effect of, oh, well, he shouldn't have said that in public about not being able to loan players. Trust me, clubs are not stupid. They know Arsenal's financial situation. What Emery said today was not news to anyone in the football world. It was news to us as fans, but it was not news to anyone in the football world. And so I feel bad for Emery, I feel bad for Raul, and I feel bad for Sven. And, to come into the situation where they're basically having to rebuild a house that is in disrepair right now. You know what I mean? I mean, that's a bad analogy.
Well,
but
I wouldn't say it's a bad analogy. I mean, the idea that you're getting at is that right now the club is kind of at a point in time where they need to make a decision what they want to be. Clearly we're not going to get the money from our ownership. We know that's not going to happen. I mean, I doubt that. I don't agree that once he pays off he's done building his stadium in Los Angeles, that he's going to all of a sudden put money into the club, because honestly, he never really has. It would be amazing if he did, but I don't think that's going to happen. So really, the club's at a point in time where they need to make a decision. They need to decide which way they're going to go. They're going to either need to get money in from their owner if they're going to compete on the same financial level as Liverpool and United and Chelsea and City, or we're going to have to go the route of a Borussia Dortmund. And I know I said this back over the summer, I think it was, that that's the way that we need to start thinking. That's the level that we need to put ourselves on as a club. We're not that top tier club. Sure, from a marketing standpoint, from a global significance brand standpoint, yes, we are. We're in that upper echelon of clubs. But from an on-field product, the way that our club needs to operate in the transfer market, we need to kind of group ourselves and set our expectations along the lines of what a Borussia Dortmund or a Tottenham, how they operate. We need to build our wage structures in the way that they operate. And that's where we are. We need to accept the fact that, those are the clubs that we're competing with financially on that level, and once they accept that, let's look at what Dortmund just did. They brought in Jadon Sancho. I don't know what the fee was, but it wasn't anything crazy.
Yeah, it wasn't significantly high.
His wages are probably almost not, like, he's on peanuts, I'm sure. He's not making that much money. And he's absolutely tearing it up. And what does that allow them to do? It allows them to sell Christian Pulisic to Chelsea for $75 million. Because they brought somebody in. And the fact that Chelsea is going to sell Hudson-Odoi for 35 and then spend 75 on Pulisic is insane. I'm not saying that I think, it's not a comment on who's the better player and who's the better prospect. It's just Pulisic is not $45 million. It's not worth $45 million more than Hudson-Odoi. Chelsea just doesn't ever like keeping their own players.
Also, just to interrupt you, that Sancho fee that Borussia Dortmund bought him for was 8 million euros.
Right.
And they've said that his value has increased 800% since then. At
least. I mean, he's exceptional. He's an incredible player. And that's what, in my opinion, Arsenal needs to start doing. And I think they're going to get there. I think you're already kind of seeing a difference in the players who were linked with this window, notwithstanding, because we know we're just looking for loans. But if you kind of look back over the summer and, since Raul and Sven have been here, you kind of have seen us linked with a different type of player, a different age group of player. So I'm hoping that they already know that that's where they need to go. That's the direction they're going to start taking it. And, the only way, I mean, we're headed for a reset. Like, we really are. Quite frankly, we need this group of young players coming through to step up.
Yeah,
there's a lot of really good young 18, 19, 20-year-old players coming through this club right now that, 2 years from now, the majority of our club of our team needs to be made up of these players.
And at the very least, secure them as long-term assets where you can sell them on. And I think, and this is kind of where my thinking about football has changed over the past 6-7 years. I used to get frustrated that Arsenal would develop these players and then they would leave the club and we would get, a decent transfer fee. And I used to think, oh, well, we're a selling club. And I think you brought up a good point about Dortmund. Dortmund is kind of operating in that space where, yes, they're not a financial powerhouse, but at the same time, they still have tons of talent on their team. And they put themselves in a position to where if they sell those guys on, they're comfortable enough with the structure they have in place that they think they can find the next one. So, like you said, they had Pulisic and, his value's been increasing over the past 2 years. And actually, we'll get into his move into Chelsea later, but just using him as an example, like you said, they were comfortable selling him on because they brought in a Jadon Sancho. Or, when they had Mario Götze, they were comfortable selling him on because they could bring in someone else to fill that place. Or when Lewandowski left, they signed Aubameyang to fill that void. So they've had this structure about evaluating players. And I think some Arsenal fans have this pride, like, no, we're too good to be a selling club. But I think we kind of need to know our place in the footballing world. Like, yes, we are a worldwide club, but we're not at the level of commercially. We're not at the level of Real Madrid, Barcelona, United, Bayern Munich, even Juventus and PSG right now. We're just not there right now. And even Liverpool, with the, kind of the history of the club, has a worldwide reputation. We're just not there. We could get there, if we make the right moves and if we build gradually, but there does have to be a level of patience. And you mentioned kind of the profile of player. This summer was kind of an anomaly in some ways, because I feel like we felt like we had to make some moves to try to get into the Champions League, but we also saw the beginnings of this kind of youth movement where you bring in Lucas Torreira, who's 22, just on the cusp of really breaking through, but we got him for 30 million, which is going to be the best 30 million we spent in years. Guendouzi was 12 million, something like that. And we've seen flashes of brilliance from him. And I think he's someone who's going to become a real long-term asset. Yeah, but at the same time, then you sign a Socrates, you sign a Lichtsteiner, and then, these are veteran players that you're hoping get you back into the Champions League, get that extra revenue flowing, and then you can kind of get the process really going in depth. So that's why I think making Champions League this year is really, really crucial to really get us out of that financial fair play hot zone, and puts us in a position where in the summer we can really kind of clear out the squad of players who just don't need to be there anymore, and at the same time try to find these younger players who we can either develop or we can sell on. And you brought up that young generation of players, and even if 2 or 3 of those guys come through to become crucial players or big assets that we could sell, that's not a bad space for the club to operate in. If a Reece Nelson, if someone offers 50 million for Reece Nelson in a year or two, assuming he continues his loan at Hoffenheim and then has a good season for Arsenal, you can then address other needs in the club. And I think that's where other clubs have kind of learned to operate. So it is going to be a growing, some growing pains. And I just hope that people kind of realize that the source of the problem is not the current administration. I think that's what people need to understand. These problems have been coming for a long time now.
Yeah, and that's obvious. That's certainly the case. But I think just kind of on this, my last kind of comment on this topic is, I would argue that this year that I don't really think the Champions League is that important for us to make this year. And it's kind of just kind of, it sounds counterintuitive, right? But the way I look at it, Socrates is somebody who is just holding a spot until Holding is really ready to step up and take it, which before he got hurt, I think we all saw him starting to ascend to where we thought he could get to. So Socrates, I think, is a placeholder. I think, we need to address left back. We don't really have anybody in the club to come in and take that position. But even Mustafi, I don't see Mustafi being a long-term player here. He's holding a place, and still Mavropanos, for example, is up and running. Petr Cech, he was just a placeholder this year until Leno was able to move over into, to adapt to the Premier League. Somebody like Mkhitaryan, he's a placeholder until Reece Nelson's ready to roll. I think a lot of the big wage, honestly, I see Aaron Ramsey. Part of the reason why they're going to let him go is that they've got Ainsley Maitland-Niles coming through the club, Emil Smith-Rowe coming through the club. And I know Smith-Rowe's a bit further off. Maitland-Niles, is at that age now where he needs to, next season is going to be huge for him to take that next big step. But all of these players right now that, are on bloated wages and are underachieving for this club, I mean, they're not guys that I think the club is counting on long term. They're here for now. We're going to move them out for what we can over the next couple of years and clear the wage bill. It's not a fix that's going to happen in one summer. I mean, we're looking at a couple of year project to get this, to straighten this squad out, to straighten this wage bill out. But a lot of those guys, they're only here to kind of usher in the next group of players, in my opinion. And if that is the case, and that, like I said, that's the way I read the situation. If that is the case, I don't think the Champions League makes that much of a difference. Yeah, it'd be great to have that money to go and spend on that next 21-year-old player that can step right in and be a star for us. Maybe it can go and get us the next up-and-coming left back. So that money would obviously help. I just don't think it's the be-all, end-all. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's the be-all, end-all, but it's like I said earlier, the more time you're away from the Champions League, the more revenue you lose, the high, you're digging yourself a hill that becomes harder and harder to climb, because that also means that the 4 clubs ahead of you are going to advance.
Sure, but the thing about that is, we talked about it. We're not on the level where we're going to be competing for players. Then they're going to say, you know what? No, I'm going to go play for United because they have Champions League and you don't, which that's a bad example. I'm going to go play for City or Chelsea because they have Champions League and you don't. They're going to go play there because they're going to pay a hell of a lot more money. Like the wage they're going to be getting offered is huge. So I don't think the difference in whether we have Champions League or not, that comes in at a tier of player that City and Chelsea and Liverpool, that upper echelon, that they're competing with wage level. Like I'm, as far as the wages are concerned, the players that we're going to be looking at, that Lucas Torreira type who's just on the verge of breaking out, those type of players are looking for the opportunity more so than Champions League or not. I don't know if I explained that all that well, but I don't think that, as far as from a recruitment standpoint, just because of the type of player that we're going to be looking at. Look at Dortmund, for example. Jadon Sancho didn't go to Dortmund because they have Champions League. I don't think that had nothing to do with his decision. It was the opportunity that he knew he was going to have with a club that he knew he was going to get a chance to play with and develop him. So from a recruitment standpoint, sure, the money is huge, but that's kind of where I'm coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, again, it's not the be-all, end-all. I just think you can't allow that gap between you and the other clubs to continue to grow, just in terms of the personnel they have. I mean, obviously, yes, we're never going to be able to offer the wages that City or Chelsea can. I mean, I think that goes without saying. Although even Chelsea, I think Abramovich has kind of eased back the money he's putting in. But so we'll focus more on City, and United obviously commercially are on a different level. So I just think you can't it's hard to understate how much of an impact it has where couple transfer windows in a row, teams are able to acquire players that we're not really even competing in the same market for. Now, as a long-term game, absolutely, it is going to be a long game and it can't be fixed right away. I just think it's one of those things where it's you kind of have to, as a fan, ease yourself back and say, you know what, it is going to be rough for the next few years. And I think maybe that's where a lot of fans are going to struggle. And even me, I mean, every season I'm like, oh man, or the past 2 seasons, I'm just thinking, how do we get back in the Champions League? How are we going to do that? Because even if that extra revenue allows you to buy 1 or 2 players that maybe you wouldn't have before, those guys can be the pieces you build around for the future. But
sure, but And I think my point is you have to fix the wage bill and the wage structure first. And that's going to take time. That's why I don't think it's important, because you have to reset everything.
Yeah. What I would say is if you look at the core of the squad, it is way too old, though. It's just way too old, because
and that's where I'm coming from. They're being played that I see them as placeholders.
But the problem is that's a lot of placeholders then, because if you think about it, I mean, and I love Aubameyang, he's almost 30. And given the way his game is predicated upon his movement, his ability to create space using his athleticism and his incredible finishing. I mean, the finishing doesn't go away, but that burst he has that really separates him from a lot of the elite strikers. Another 2 seasons, how is that going to work out? Mkhitaryan, I think he's 30, right?
He's already useless. However old he is.
Yeah. Ozil's 30, and he's got 3 more years on this contract. You have, I don't know if Czech might be out this summer. I don't know.
Think so.
Monreal's 33, going on 34, and we've extended his deal for another year for some reason.
So we don't have anybody else.
But the thing is, like, I mean, you have Kolasinac. I'd be willing to try and find an understudy for him. But Socrates over 30, Lichtsteiner over 30. Who am I forgetting? There's a couple. There's several. There's a few other players on the wrong side of 28, and I think 28 is kind of that age where players are really hitting their peak in terms of not just physically, but also game understanding, game experience and things like that. So there is going to be there's going to have to be a significant overhaul of the club's, of the squad itself over the next, 2 to 3 years. I mean, the question then becomes, is Unai Emery going to get the time to see that process through to fruition? Or what someone else mentioned to me on Twitter today was, is he just kind of the stopgap? Is he just kind of the guy who's brought in to stabilize the ship and set things up for the next guy? Because I think one of Arsene Wenger's big flaws towards the end of his tenure is he took on a lot of players because I think he wanted to go out on top. I think he spent a lot on players thinking, this is probably my last shot. Let me try. I mean, we spent 35 million on Mustafi. We spent 20 million on Lucas Perez. We spent like 20 million on Gabriel. I love Granit Xhaka. We spent 35 million on Granit Xhaka. He spent a lot of money on players that we're now saddled with, except for Gabriel. I mean, we managed to recoup something for him, but that is also kind of what put us into this position. So it is going to be a situation where, is Unai Emery going to take a lot of the flack for the spending parts? I mean, the on-field stuff we can get into, because I think recently I've seen some pretty worrying signs. But off the field, do you feel like he's going to be the stopgap, or do you think he can be the long-term solution?
I really can't answer that. It all depends on what the leadership of the club, inside the club, thinks. If they're expecting it to be a long road to flip the squad, then they're going to give him the opportunity to see it through. If they're short-sighted and are expecting us to be competing for the Premier League right now, then no, he's not going to get that chance. So it all depends on where, the leadership inside the club's coming from. The fans, they're never going to understand. They're always going to call for his head because we want to compete. We're fans. We don't want to admit that we're not able to compete for it. I mean, I just look at, my Buffalo sports teams, man. We went through this, especially with our hockey team, for, 3-4 years ago, we went through all of this, where they intentionally were really bad for a couple of years to get a bunch of good players. And they're kind of starting finally to see the benefits of adding those players. There's still a little ways to go, but it's kind of the same idea. It's going to get worse. I don't know if I want to say that, because I think we're pretty, regardless, we're good enough to stay in that Europa League type of range while we flip the squad. We're not going to drop any lower than where we are now, but we're never really going to have a shot at that top spot. So, like I said, in a long, roundabout kind of way, yeah, it all depends on, for Emery, where the club leadership is coming from. But kind of to move this along kind of into some of the other things going on, we talked about the turnover of the squad that's going to happen. We're seeing that happen already with, quite frankly, one of the best players we've had at our club for the last almost a decade now since he's been at the club, Aaron Ramsey.
Yeah, actually, in the Ramsey situation, I do want to get your take on it, but I also want to read you something that David Ornstein wrote today. So he said that, Emery wanted to build the team around Ramsey, who was, he was named as one of the 5 captains. But Ornstein said, it became clear that Ramsey's desire to play as a number 8, running onto the ball from an advanced central midfield position, clashed with Emery's vision. Emery does not usually deploy a number 8, meaning the Welshman has mainly been used in a strict deeper role without license to roam, or in the number 10 position with his back to goal. And I read that and I was very confused because, this is the same Unai Emery who came in. From all accounts, when he interviewed, he had a docket on every single player, strengths and weaknesses, and how he would improve him. I don't know how he would have come into the situation not knowing that Ramsey has always played that way as a central midfielder, who, kind of makes forays into the box, but also, has got the engine to get back. I don't know how he would have come in thinking that was going to be significantly different under his reign. I mean, do you think that's just the club kind of putting out a smoke screen, through their official mouthpiece? Or, I mean, how do you think Emery's handled this Ramsey situation? I'll put it that way.
Well, I think if you look at it, I think initially that's probably true. I mean, look at Ramsey's usage at the beginning of the season. He was played in a number 10. He was played as, and as a deeper, more restricted central midfielder. But as the season's gone on, I mean, where have we seen Aaron Ramsey deployed? When he's on the field, he's as a number 8. When he gets to play, he plays his position, whether that's him doing whatever he wants, regardless of what Emery wants him to do. Obviously, we wouldn't know that. I don't see that really being the case.
I also don't see him on the field very often.
That's true. So that certainly could be part of it. There comes a point in time where if you know that a player is leaving, why would you continue giving him the opportunities when you've got players who are going to be here for the long term that you need to invest in? I know that he gets us, he scores, but I've noticed a distinct difference in his play this year, that he seems to be playing for himself a little bit more. He's looking, like I said, I know, maybe it's confirmation bias, where that's what I'm looking for, but that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from how he's played this year, is that he's playing for himself. And it all makes sense. I mean, he's never really fit into what Emery's trying to do. I don't really buy that, Emery didn't know coming in. I think that what Ornstein said is just something that the club wanted to get out there. I don't think that's actually how it went down. But
yeah, I mean, I would hope so, because I think anyone, even someone with a very surface level understanding of Arsenal, has always known that that's where Ramsey has thrived during his career. He's never played as a pure number 10 for Arsenal. That's never been his role, because most of his time in central midfield has coincided with Mesut Ozil's time at the club. And he's also not a pure defensive midfielder. So he's always kind of functioned as a box-to-box midfielder. So this idea that Emery got here and realized, oh, yeah, I don't actually use a number 8. And, oh, I wasn't expecting this guy to try to get into the box that often. That, depending on if you believe it or not, can lead you to a few different conclusions. If you believe it, then it does lead you to question Emery quite a bit and not knowing how to use one of our best players. If you don't believe it, then obviously you would think that maybe the club is just putting this out as kind of damage control, because they know that they've been taking some heat for losing him on a free to Juventus, one of the best clubs in Europe. So, I think the situation has just been handled poorly on multiple fronts. I think Ramsey's agent was the cause of the majority of this, because Ramsey's agent all summer was playing games, posting on Twitter about his client and how the deal's almost done and this and that. But from all accounts, he was the one kind of driving Arsenal past a certain point that they were willing to go. And so, from all accounts, there was an agreement in place. And I think Ramsey even hinted something to that effect several months ago.
There was familiar, yeah.
Right? There was something in place, and there was at least a structure in place. Maybe not, pen wasn't quite put to paper, obviously, but there was an understanding. And then I think it sounds like, and again, we can only go off of speculation, but it sounds like Ramsey's agent kind of went back for more, tried to change the structure, and then Raul said, no, you know what? We're comfortable going to this point. We're not going to go beyond that. And then this also kind of coincided with the fact that there did seem to be not a clash, but just Emery and Ramsey haven't really gelled in terms of like what Ramsey's role is supposed to be, how we're going to structure our midfield. Because like you said, we started the season with Ramsey playing higher up the pitch, and then we put Ozil wide, and then we played like Guendouzi and Xhaka in midfield. And that's kind of what we did for the first month of the season while we integrated Torreira, and it just wasn't working. And I don't think we haven't tried Ramsey and Torreira in midfield. I just don't think he sees that as good enough on the ball to maybe build from deep, to play that, build from deep and control possession and, kind of that sort of passing game. I just don't think he trusts it. So then it's kind of put Ramsey in this position, like you said, where Emery's thinking, well, you don't really fit what I'm doing. I'm not going to play you. And also you're not going to be here next season. So you're kind of put into two different things, because obviously on talent alone, Ramsey is one of the best players at the club. I don't think anyone would argue that. And I love him as a player and for everything he's done for the club. And I will be sad to see him tear it up at Juventus, because I know he will. But, if you don't fit your coach's vision and you want to try to build for the future, then yes, you are going to give Guendouzi extra opportunities. But at the same time, if you have a player and you're trying to achieve a goal, why not use the best talent available at your disposal? And that includes Ramsey. So it's a shitty situation for everyone. I think because Ramsey has kind of cemented a legend status, in my opinion, for, winning 2 FA Cups and a lot of the moments he's had, it is going to be bittersweet to see him leave. It just seems like with him and Ozil, especially, for your arguably two most talented players to kind of fall out with your manager or have some sort of issue, it's kind of frustrating to see.
Yeah, and I think your point about the agent is spot on. It seems like the agent knew all along that they were just going to try and use Arsenal to get a higher wage somewhere else. I mean, I think what it came out, Ramsey's going to be on 280 grand a week or something like that. He's going to be the second highest earner at Juventus now. And there's no way Arsenal was ever getting to that number for him. So for me, I agree with you. His agent really strung it along and played Arsenal, played him like a fiddle, quite frankly, through the entire summer. And, he's making a cool $9 million himself off of it. So can understand why he would play that game, and it's disappointing, because you don't want to see a player like that go. He's somebody that we've seen him grow and bounce back from a gruesome injury and become one of the most talented players. He's one of the all-time leading goal scorers from that position at the club. I mean, he's been an astounding player. He's excellent. He brings something that, quite frankly, no other midfielder in the Premier League offers. He's incredibly unique in that way. So it's going to be a shame to see him go, because he can change the game in just a couple of moments.
I mean, he really is one of the most offensively gifted central midfielders that I've seen at Arsenal in a long time. I mean, if you think of any of the big moments, the nicest goals, the prettiest goals, the best passages of play, Aaron Ramsey's been involved in pretty much all of them. If you think about it, even this season, the goal against Fulham where there were a couple back heels in midfield, and then he ended it with a back heel off an Aubameyang assist. You think back to the goal against Norwich several years ago where he dribbled around 4 different players and scored. there's just been so many iconic moments with him. The back heel against Spurs that he somehow scored, he's just one of those guys that has this flair where even if he is kind of struggled with passing or maybe some of the other parts of the game, that he's capable of that moment. And, he's never been one to shy away in the big games. I think arguably him and Theo Walcott over the past 10 years have probably been our two best big game players. Just in terms of always trusting them to show up. I mean, Theo was the one who was scoring against Chelsea, United, City. Ramsey scored plenty of goals against the big teams as well. So I do also think you lose a little bit there with just that, it's hard to quantify intangible things like ferocity or just, I don't know, like not motivation. And I don't want to say desire because I'm going to sound like an English pundit. But just those intangibles do matter to some extent. I don't think there's any way you can say they can't. I mean, you can get into the metrics of everything, but to have someone like that who's just not awed by the occasion, and to lose someone like that, I think that's probably where his loss is going to be most felt, because you could plug him into any game, and he's not going to be intimidated by the environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess, just taking into account the Ramsey situation in the midfield, I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to you so much about Arsenal over the past couple months, just, busy times and all. Yeah. But, where have you kind of seen improvement in Arsenal under Unai Emery, and where are your areas of concern? And maybe let's start with the areas of improvement. Where have you seen players or stylistically? What have you seen?
For me, it comes down to players. Leno has settled in nicely for me. He's looking like he's going to be very, very good for us. I mean, yeah, he's got his occasional blunder, error, whatever. It's going to happen. He's still a relatively young goalkeeper, but I think he's going to solidify that position for a very long time. I was really encouraged with the progress Rob Holding was making until he went and got hurt. So that's going to be a tough road back for him. It was, was one of my preseason bold predictions on Holding that
I remember that
this was going to be his year to really cement his place, and I was on the right track until he went and got hurt. Hector Bellerin having a better season. He's really kind of settled back in a little bit. Lucas Torreira, Matteo Guendouzi, those are kind of my positives. I don't think that Emery's really settled into a tactic yet, and a lot of that has been affected by injuries that we've had at some key positions. It's been affected by some ineffective play from the likes of Mkhitaryan, the fact that Ozil's never healthy, the fact that we've been blowing through defenders and are scraping the barrel to find guys to play back there. So he hasn't really had the opportunity, quite frankly, to get his best 11 out on the field and really figure out how they're going to go, how they're going to work. Negatives for me, Ozil not being able to be on the field, Mkhitaryan never really seeming overly interested. Mkhitaryan, I mean, it's whatever. We just need to kind of move on from him as soon as possible. Granit Xhaka has been okay. He's been pretty good. I was hoping to kind of see him take a step up this year. I mean, he's a fine player. He's solid. I'm not complaining about him. I was just really hoping to see him kind of take another step. But Mustafi for me is probably the biggest disappointment on a personnel level, because you cannot blame previous coaching staff for the defending anymore. It comes down to players, and he is a problem. So
he sucks.
Oh my God,
he sucks. There's no defending him anymore.
No, there's not.
And for me, I guess, and I'll admit, over previous podcasts, I was really, really optimistic. I think over the past month or two, I've seen areas that I'm concerned about. I mean, obviously a lot of it is dictated by injuries, but I do think there's been the constant changing of lineups and constant tinkering. I understand that, he's trying to figure out his best 11, but there hasn't really been any consistent theme that you've seen in his lineups. You know, one day you'll see Aubameyang out wide, or one day you'll see Aubameyang up top and no Lacazette. And, you know, the struggle to figure out a way to use those two has been really frustrating. I think the midfield situation has cost us points because there have been games where he's played Torreira, Guendouzi, and Xhaka in midfield, and there's just no creativity coming from the three of them. You know, I think that he does have a conservative nature, and I think that's kind of came through in the results against Wolves, Palace, and Brighton, where we dropped points we just shouldn't have because we weren't able to create chances. And I think those were games where our XG was significantly lower than in other games, and I think it was largely due to the personnel choices. I haven't seen the pressing improve that much in terms of coordination. I've seen signs of it. There's been flashes, but I've never seen a consistently impressive press where I'm thinking, wow, we are completely crowding midfield. We're crowding them. They're not able to play the ball back, and we're winning it up. We're winning it higher up the pitch. I have not seen that. And, you know, the defending, it's tough because I do think, like you said, a lot of it is personnel. I don't think you know, Simeone could make Mustafi a good defender. I mean, I just don't. So the handy's been dealt with in terms of defenders. I completely understand that. And Socrates is serviceable, but not much else. And he's 30. Mavropanos has had the world's longest groin injury. I don't know what he did to it. I don't want to know how he did it either. But he's been out for 4 months with a growing injury. Koscielny is just not the player he was. I mean, you can't expect someone to come back from an Achilles. That's just
no, not at that age, especially.
Exactly. It was an unfair expectation to have him come in and then play 3 games in the span of like 10 days. Lichtsteiner's 34. He's not a center back. He's not even really a right back anymore. You know, for as much as I thought he would provide from a leadership perspective, and the fact that he is a shithouser, and I like that, he's not provided anything on the field. So really, defensively, it's just been, I mean, Bellerin's been the one bright spot there. You know, Kolasinac has shown flashes going forward, but defensively, he's just, other than the home game against Liverpool, I mean, I really can't think of too many impressive defensive performances. From a positive perspective, I'll point to a lot of the guys you did. You know, Torreira and Guendouzi, I really like what I've seen from them. I've seen so much improvement in Bellerin, not knowing when to get forward, but also not just crossing the ball aimlessly into the box. I think he looks for that cutback now to the top of the box, and I think that's a really interesting change in the style of play. So those have kind of been my positives. Iwobi, I mean, he's starting to kind of get some form again. I think he's improved. It's just one of those things where, you know, it is a wait and see process, but you know, certainly we got a game against West Ham on Saturday, so that's one that we really have no excuse not to pick up the 3 points. But before we wrap up, I did want to get your quick take on a U.S. soccer story, because I know it's been the talk of American soccer Twitter just for the last 5 minutes here, and that's the Christian Pulisic move to Chelsea. Putting aside our Arsenal bias, which is hard in this situation because I hate Chelsea, what is your thought on that move for him, given where he is in his career, given his status as the face of American soccer, and given the season he's had for Dortmund, which hasn't been particularly good, all things considered?
It's kind of a mixed bag for me. Him moving to the Premier League, I think that's something that we always knew was going to happen. And I think it's probably the right time for him to make that move. The issue that I have is that Chelsea notoriously does not give younger players the opportunity that they need. And I know, generally speaking, it's their own young players. But I do think that he's going to get plenty of opportunities. I mean, they spent a shit ton of money on him, so he's going to get the opportunities. Quite frankly, I think Hazard's gone this summer anyway.
So do you think Pulisic's been brought in as a Hazard replacement?
I could see that, yeah. I think he's brought. I mean, obviously he won't be with the club with Chelsea until the summer. So yeah, I mean, I could certainly see them bringing him in to kind of step right in and take that role. the Premier League is the place for him. And as much as I don't like that he's at Chelsea, I'd rather him be at Chelsea than United and Spurs, because it's United and Spurs, and City because he would never get a game at City. So obviously I would have liked him at Arsenal the most. We never were going to spend that kind of money on him, obviously. So, I mean, Chelsea's just kind of, for me personally, they're just kind of there. I don't like them, but I dislike City and United and Spurs more.
Yeah, I think from a playing perspective, it actually sets up pretty well for him because Willian's over 30, and there were rumors that Barcelona's trying to get Willian. Pedro's old, and Hazard might be on the way out. So there are going to be opportunities for him, and I think that was my primary concern on first glance, because I didn't really think of it that perspective. I was just thinking, man, Chelsea, they buy a lot of young players and they don't really do anything with them. Then they sell them on and they go do great things elsewhere. De Bruyne, Salah, players like that. So that was my initial concern. I guess that was, the flip side of that is that if he is being brought in as a Hazard replacement, that's a lot of pressure on him to replicate the effect that Hazard has on that club, because Hazard, when he's on form, is the best player in the Premier League, in my opinion. All things considered, he is just unplayable on his day. And to expect Pulisic to come in, and Chelsea fans are demanding, they're going to expect him to come in, and especially if they lose Hazard, they need to replicate the goals and assists that he brings, and that's a lot of pressure to put on him. I also think he's going to face a lot of external pressure from American soccer fans to be the face of American soccer in the biggest English-speaking league in the world. We can't understate that. We can't understate the pressure he's going to get, because he's our great hope. He's the guy that's supposed to represent us on the big stage. I mean, there are other players coming through I'm excited about, Adams, McKennie, all those guys. But for all intents and purposes, this is the guy that we're trying to market. And he didn't ask for that. Don't get me wrong. He didn't ask for that pressure, but that is what it is. And so he's going to kind of carry two different weights on him, the national pride element and just being at one of the biggest clubs in the world. So, I hope he finishes this season strong and, kind of gets some momentum going into the summer and then can go from there. But the only thing is I worry just about the weight of expectation on him. I know everyone who has met him and says he's a very level-headed guy. He doesn't really let that get to him. Just as a fan, it is great to see this kind of fee being paid for an American player, because I think it's going to pave the way for a lot of kids to come. And we're seeing that already. We're seeing, Red Bull Leipzig spending money on Tyler Adams and bringing him in to play right away, not to loan him out or anything. McKennie, we mentioned, a lot of the other.
Sargent's breaking through the first team at
Werder Bremen.
Werder Bremen also, yeah.
So there's some promising signs, but I think this level of move is bringing in international attention. I think that's the difference with any other move an American player's made. I mean, what was the biggest American move before this? It was like Clint Dempsey.
Yeah, probably Dempsey when he went from Fulham to Tottenham.
Right? Yeah, so, I mean, no one's really spent this much money on American players. So there's going to be a lot of eyes on him. I hope it works out. I guess time will tell. I'm curious to see how he fits in Sarri's system, which is very predicated on quick movement, passing.
I think he fits it well.
And I think that's where you could really see him shine. If you watched Napoli when Sarri was there, I could see him being used a lot like Insigne, a very quick twitch kind of player, quick feet, able to cut in from the left-hand side, score goals. I think he could potentially fit that role. I just hope he doesn't do it against Arsenal,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But no, just wanted to get that brief discussion about Pulisic, because I mean, obviously it is very relevant these days. And I know you and I have talked about maybe doing a state of U.S. soccer pod in the not too distant future, kind of getting into the coaching search, some of the squad players.
You put search in air quotes, right?
Yeah, I should have. Yeah, I forgot. I forgot we had the video going. The coaching, we're just going to call it the the coaching hire, because there was no search, but we certainly want to get into that at a later date, and so we'll certainly look forward to talking about that. But before we head out, any final words for the listeners?
No, not really. I mean, let's be patient, I guess. Keep an eye on the young players coming through, and yeah, let's keep winning some games. Let's play some. I'd like to see us start playing a little bit better. I'd like to see us get healthy, but it's gonna be a tough road. We thought it was difficult before. I think we're right in the middle of it, and it's gonna be tough before it gets better. So hang in there.
Yeah, and certainly we'll keep an eye out on this Denis Suarez news. We didn't really get into it because, frankly, I'm going to speak for both of us. Neither of us knows much about him as a player. So we know Unai Emery worked with him at Sevilla, and so we'll see if anything comes of that. That's likely to be the only business we do if it does get done. So, and we'll certainly see if maybe Juventus springs some money to get Ramsey early. I doubt it, but we'll certainly keep an eye on that. But Ian, where can the folks find you on Twitter?
At GunnersFan6.
And of course, you can find me at UFGoonerAJ. You can find the podcast at EurosnobPod, Facebook.com/EurosnobPod. You can subscribe on iTunes, listen on Podomatic. I'm thinking of trying to get us on Spotify soon once I figure out how to do that. So, but we'll certainly, any feedback you guys have, any comments, questions, please feel free to send that our way. But until next time, take it easy, guys.
All right, peace out.